He loved the press. He loved the press, and the press loved him. And nothing was dull when Punch was around. If it was dull, he was going to make it, and something would happen to get the, and especially if for one reason or other things weren't going good with the club, he would throw something on himself to take away the responsibilities from the players and that. And you know, he was good. I mean, I don't think you'll have too many players here say anything badly about him over the years that he was here. And you know, and unfortunately, in any business, there are things that have to be done, and he wasn't afraid to do them. He just did them, and that was that.
He was a bit of an enigma. He could be very, very gruff and hard-nosed, but underneath it all, I think he had a heart of gold. He cared for his players a lot. He helped me in a couple of situations which were being, you know, certain situations arranging financing for a home purchase, and even those little things.
He's a very loyal guy. If Punch Imlach told you something, you never needed a contract. But don't cross him.
He wasn't a direct communicator to the players. He was more of a taskmaster. He knew how to manage benches. He knew how to get the right players on the ice, and he knew how to judge talent.
So when you signed the contract, how many years did you sign your first contract?
Well, I signed for 2 years,
yeah.
And well, the money.
Big money, right?
Well, the money at that time was not like today, but most of the players were making something like $7,500 a year,
yeah.
And I was making
Unreal.
20, so for my first year, and I was 20,000, and I had a $30,000 bonuses for signing with the Sabres, and Imlach didn't want to give me 30. He gave me 20 in the first year and 10 in the second year. So.
and then your teammate from that's funny. He didn't want to give
Rico
you
was making more money than me.
Rico.
19.5 my first year, 21.5 my second year.
Second year, wow.
Yeah, 20 signing bonus. He says, I can't give you more than Perreault.
Punch, very bright guy, and liked Punch a lot. And he called me after the first season, and I was on a 5-year deal. And he called me, he said, would you meet me in Toronto? And I said, sure. So I flew up there, not knowing anything about what he was going to say. And we sat and talked about the old Leaf teams and the Sabres and Tim Horton, everybody wonderful from his past. And it was thrilling. We had a couple of beers together and had dinner together, and he took me back to the airport. I'm going, what the heck is going on here? And the last words he said to me when he put me on the plane were, I just wanted you to know how much I want you back. And from that moment on, I wanted to come back. And that's the story, and it's the truth. And whatever he got that idea in his head, it worked. Because from that point on, I wanted to go back to Buffalo for sure.
The biggest and the best for me was Timmy Horton. You know, I mean, you know, they had the wisdom at the time, Punch and Joe Crozier, to say, here's a young kid that doesn't know very much about the game, but he's hungry. And they brought Timmy in, who was a great mentor for me. And you know, he's a guy I watched growing up, big Maple Leaf fan. Of course, he was their best defenseman, and so I was always drawn to him. And then to have him as my partner, my roommate, was like really special for me in my rookie year.
Tim Horton, we had Tim Horton playing for us. He was in best shape of all. Everybody else, he was in.
It's embarrassing to stand beside him.
Yeah,
He was 23 years old and he had a rippled stomach.
You know.
Timmy was the strongest hockey player I have ever played with or against. Like physically the strongest man I'd ever been on the ice with. And he had this great knack of putting a stick down to block passes. And he was trying to teach me how to do it. And I would do it, and the puck would keep sliding underneath, you know, up near my glove. And he got frustrated with me one day, you know, and he says, you know, why does that puck keep going underneath? I said, I don't know, I'm putting it down flat. And he says, well, how are you putting it down? I said, what do you mean? I hold my stick and I put it down. He says, no, you got to grab it with your thumb and 2 fingers and put it down flat. Now, anybody that's played the game, to try to grab a hockey stick and hold it on the ice, I mean, it takes such tremendous strength. But that's how he did it.
Well, forget picking off passes. We're playing the Flyers once, and of all guys, I think it was Schultze that skipped it over his stick. So Timmy just reached it up with 2 fingers and his thumb and tripped him, knocked the feet right from underneath him with just the tips of his fingers and thumb on that stick. And you're watching this, and going, oh my God. And that year we made the playoffs for the first time. We're trying to scrape through the third period of that game 5 in order to get into overtime, and I was out there a lot. And every time it was with Timmy on defense and Roger in net, and I'm watching the competitiveness of this grown man, aged veteran player, and I thought, wow, this is how you play hockey.
Tim did everything to the nth degree. He played hard, he worked hard, he partied hard, he drove hard. And I remember he missed our wedding. I got married the summer following my first year, and so he and his wife were going to take Teresa and me out to dinner. So we met them, we went up in their apartment, that apartment, the Statler Hilton, and then we're sitting there waiting, and he threw this catalog at me. And he says, that's my new vehicle. And it was the Pantera. And he loved speed. You know, he had an old white Cadillac that Peter McNabb used to drive to the rink with him. Peter was terrified every time he got behind or in the car with Timmy. And unfortunately, it was that attitude, that taking everything to the nth degree, that did him in.
We were playing in Toronto, and he got cut in the eye with a stick. So we didn't play him the second period. But though he was the star that night in Toronto. So he come up to me and he said, Joe, he says, my partner's here with Tim Horton. Can I stay overnight to get this thing done? I said, well, what about John Butch, our trainer or our doctor? What about him? I mean, I say he's going to sew you up. Oh, he can do that tomorrow morning. Anyway, I said, well, that's fine. Make sure you're there tomorrow morning. So all of a sudden, about 3 o'clock in the morning, my telephone rings. And it's the chief of police calling me from St. Catharines. And they say, we got one of your players here. I think you should come down and see him. And I says, who is it? No, you better come down here and see this fellow here.
And I got a call early in the morning, and we had a game that night. And you know, so I went outside. There was a patio, and I just shoveled snow. I shoveled it from one area to another, shoveled it back, and I went for a walk on the beach with the dog, just trying to reconcile everything. And you know, said, okay, you know, I got to get ready for the game. And I was okay. I thought I was okay. And we get to the game, and I'm on the ice. They do the anthem, and then it was like a moment of silence for Timmy. And wow, it just boom, like a ton of bricks. And it was almost like I felt the grief of the whole building, you know. And it was hard, a hard start, but you know, you get through it. And Joe Crozier came down, and he comforted me. I'm playing the first shift, and I'm bawling like a little girl. You know, it was crazy, but you get through it.
It was a bit of a blur for a couple of days, and you know, you just don't really, you don't think about much of it. You're just kind of like in between episodes of uncertainty. It took a while to sink in, but yeah, it was a major loss for the franchise for sure.
Because he really was that father figure, that leadership guy that we all looked to, and he was such a special teammate and special person that this was the end of a terrible year, and it was a devastating experience to go through.
Something happens to a player today in hockey, we can relate to it. Like people say, "Oh, that's sad." You know, he got killed in a motorcycle accident. Like a guy like Joe and Mike and myself can relate to that. We just don't say, you know, "Oh, it's sad it happened." We lived it. Yeah. We saw it. We saw one of our best. He was actually at that time became the godfather of the team.
But even now, when you talk about it, it was a big loss for all of us.
When we started here, I was a veteran, of course. I've been in the league 15 years or so, and we knew that when he drafted Gilbert Perreault, it was a question of, you know, I want you to play with him. You're going to play with him all year long. Just check, get him the puck, and then get out of the road. Just let him go. That was what they wanted Perreault to do, was just carry the puck, get the feel of the league, and of course he was exciting when he did it. There were, They were thinking about selling tickets too.
I saw Gilbert Perreault play his first NHL game. It was an exhibition game in Brantford. Buffalo Sabres played the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I remember my dad took me to the game. I was about 9 years old, and he told me, watch this number 11, and I can still remember him picking the puck up behind the net and kind of full speed going down and around and creating havoc on defense. And so for me, I was lucky. I got, growing up in Southern Ontario, we got Buffalo Sabres a lot on TV, and you know, when Gordie Howe sort of retired at that point in time, Perreault became one of my favorite players because of the skill level that he had.
Because Gilbert came from the Montreal Junior Canadiens, they did nothing but win. They won every game. They were the best team in junior for 3 years. And he came here, and we weren't a great team. We were an expansion team the first year. And I can remember Gilbert, after like 10, 15 games in the season, he'd be just on the bench bawling his eyes out. He hated to lose. He did not like to lose. He wasn't used to losing. So a guy like that, like Joe said, you can build a team around a Dominik Hasek, but you can build a team and a franchise around Gilbert Perreault. And that's what he did for the city of Buffalo.
I can remember when I first came to Buffalo, I would play the power play, and I'd play right wing. And in those days, you'd see guys wind up and go end to end. And when I saw Gilbert, I'd see him at the far blue line, and the defenseman would be behind the net with the puck. And I knew he was coming around behind. And when he went by me a few times, honest to God, it felt like you were a revolving door. He was going so fast. But I learned very, very soon to get up ahead of the play, and so I could keep up to him. But he was something.
I was invited to golf with Bobby Orr, and I didn't want to be like a total geek and ask him a million questions. But eventually I had to ask him one, and I asked him who the toughest guy was for him to play against. Or the best player that he ever played against. And he said Gilbert Perreault. And to hear that from Bobby Orr is quite a compliment.
When I was a kid, I idolized Gilbert Perreault. And when I was playing street hockey, I was Gilbert Perreault, in the game. And to have the opportunity to play with what I term as a master of the game. He saw the game in a different light.
You know, I saw it firsthand when Buffalo would come in to play Winnipeg, and even playing some old-timer games with him after my career. I mean, the guy still had this jitterbug sidestep move that a lot of defensemen were caught swimming across the ice trying to get to him because he just drag it forever, and they think they have him, and they just can't get to him. It just great lateral movement.
If you want to look at old game films, he looks like a modern-day skater, and we all look like, holy man, look at this. And I've seen some of him. He was just so smooth. He was powerful from this area here where players today are so powerful, like built, like really strong. And, you know, he was in a level by himself. He really was. I remember, and it's still one of my favorite clips, when he was penalty killing, he had the puck, and, you know, they came to take it from him. He beat one guy. They came to take it from him again. He beat another guy. And he went on for like 30 seconds, just stick handling, keeping the puck away. And then when he was done, he dumped it in and changed. And there's nobody else could do that. Yeah. I mean, he was just, he was really the most talented and gifted player I was around for those first few years. And that was now I'm talking about the tail end. He's at the tail end of his career, and he's by far one of the best skaters, the best stick. He could stick handle like better than anybody. And I don't know if there was another guy on our team could stick handle that way.
Back then, we all went to lunch every day, and we would follow him to lunch. And when he was ready to go home, we'd stay as long as it took until he was ready to go. And we'd
until
just
every story was over.
Until we'd sit and listen to everything he had to say. And we really took pride, really, in sitting with him and listening to him and trying to learn as much as we could from him.
We were like little puppy dogs following him around, you know what I mean? Like and to us, it was awesome. You know, we knew he would write on the board where he was going to lunch every day. Yeah. You know, we'd be right behind him. You know, just learning things from him. Old stories, you know, he talked about the French Connection a lot. You know, how they trained, how they, you know, the games that they played in. And, you know, it was just, it was fun times. And, you know, we got him right at the end of his career. We didn't even get him when he was, you know, when he was at the peak of his career, but, you know, still, you know, a heck of a hockey player, like one of the most, and I still think one of the most talented guys that I've ever played with, and there's been quite a few of them.
I remember my father telling me one time, Gilbert, early in the season when I first came, he says, you know, Danny, you work on your shot, but you should also work on your moves, you know, like move laterally back. And he says, well, why don't you go to Gilbert Perreault and ask him if he can help you? So I was said, Dad, I just want to ask him for their autographs right now. I don't want to, you know, I haven't deserved or earned a chance to do it.
You were the shooter.
I was a shooter. Right. But let me ask you this, or tell you this. I remember right in January, I think I'd scored my 20th goal. And I said, okay, I'm going to go ask Gilbert about, you know, after practice if he can help me with my moves. So I go up to you, Gilbert, can you help me with my moves? And he looked at me and he goes, in your French accent, he went, Denny, I don't know how I do them. I just do them. And I said, well, keep on doing them.
I don't know what to do with it either. I mean, you just go on the ice, you take the puck, and you know.
It was amazing, though, the gift. Yeah, the gift. The gift
to beat the guy in front of you. That's what it is.
I do remember the day that, you know, I don't know if you remember, we were sitting at the Blarney Stone in New York City, 38 games into the year, and you know, he turned to us and said, I'm done. And we were like, what do you mean you're done? Are you going home? And he says, no, I'm not going to play hockey anymore. And that was it. He finished it. And, you know, obviously that last year, he must have been contemplating whether he was going to come back and play. And
it was a big year with the pension that year, too.
Yeah,
and he was in a situation where he was kind of the older guard on the team, and he was still leading the team in scoring. And I think that was frustrating to management, that he was still carrying the torch when they had us younger guys that were supposed to be taking it over, but you know, Gilbert and his talent, he kept going, and he wasn't playing with the most gifted players at that time when he retired.
But you know, I mean, when you think that you talk about him staying on, I mean, from those 70s to where he was in the 80s, you know, they dismantled that team and brought us all of these young guys in, and I think, you know, at that time, I remember him saying that, you know, my time is up and it's your guys' turn to take over. And I still have a lot of respect for that day. I look back on it when I, you know, ended up retiring or moving on. And, you know, for Gilbert just to say, you know what, I've made my decision, and, you know, we never saw him again.
Yeah. I did take his bag. I still have his bag.
Oh, really?
Yes, I do. Oh, we sat next to him.
Yeah.
So I grabbed his number 11 out of his stall and put that away quickly.
Rick Martin was an intense guy that he had as good a shot as anyone who ever played the game, and Rick was a tough son of a gun. People underestimated his toughness, and he became a really good teammate in Buffalo. And in Rennie Robert had a talented guy that found that they put on that line, and all of a sudden everything came together for him. And Rennie was an underestimated tough guy too. He could be physical. So we had the connection was an inordinately talented line that scored a lot of goals and got a lot of points, but they also could come to play. And I mean, Gilbert himself was a big guy. He was a big, strong guy. So there wasn't much missing from that team.
They were much better without the puck than people give them credit. But one of the other reasons, when they were on the ice, they had the puck. They had it all the time. The French connection was, they were quick. From the blue line in, there's nobody in hockey ever wanted to score a goal more than Rick Martin. He was dynamite. Rennie, very talented, good skater, a little more aggressive if he wanted to be, could move the puck and all that. And then there was Gilbert, who just had pure skill.
Rene was an integral part of that line. He came over, I think it was in late 72 for the trade from Eddie Shack from Pittsburgh. Yeah. And just talk a little bit about what Rene's, what his assets were.
Well, when Rene came, obviously he won the scoring championship in the Quebec Major Junior League, and I played against him in junior. He was a very good playmaker. He was playing center at the time, but he put him on right wing, and Punch kind of said, well, I want you to check for these guys, but Rene had a little more to give than just checking. I mean, he was a good playmaker.
Good point.
He read the play, and we immediately hit it off. I mean, Bert can tell you. I mean, we just knew where everybody, each other, who we were.
He was a very smooth hockey player. He had a good vision of the game and good goal scorer too.
Gilbert was more quiet, less confident in his language skills, I think, than Richard and Rene, both of whom spoke perfect French and perfect English. I think Richard was, a very strong-willed, aggressive offensive player. I think Rene Robert was a little more of the personality guy. you know, the jokester, the guy that kept the room loose and things like that. So, you know, Gilbert was pretty much, you know, on his game. He was equal to the task of having fun, but he was more business on the ice. Richard was, to me, the pure shooter. He was the Lanny McDonald to Gilles Perreault's Daryl Sittler, if you want to make a comparison, although, I mean, those might not be bad comparisons if you look at the historical records.
And of course, playing with Rick and Rennie was easy. I mean, you just
The best-
make the move. I know Rick was used to come late, and Rennie was the same thing. Was very smooth with the puck. So
Yeah.
it was a kind of like Rico said.
You had
we knew
outlets,
where we
maybe.
were.
Yeah.
We knew where we were on the ice.
I remember one move one night. We were playing at Maple Leaf Gardens, and
We always played well in Toronto, too.
Well, it was
big
a big
ice surface.
Was a big rink, yeah.
Big rink. We love to skate.
He was
Go ahead,
coming
sorry.
down, and Brian Glennie thought, he says, I got him lined up, and Gilbert was coming down the boards, and then Glennie came right across, and he went to hit him. Gilbert cut in, flipped the puck between his legs. He cut in, and I saw that. Well, I knew what was going to happen. I was
right.
coming down the left wing, and I just kept going. Then I really sped up when I saw him. Well, I get to the net, and here's Gilbert, draws the goalie over, and nice empty net, you know.
You did that a few times.
Yeah, he did that a few times.
Yeah.
Tickets came in as a young kid, and he played with two of the smartest players in the game, and he fit in like a glove, and he could score. And boy, the first time you watched him, you said you could see in his eyes that the passion was there.
Intense, first and foremost. This kid came to play, and you can't ever talk about Danny without talking about our first ever game against Boston. He scored, I believe it was 18 seconds in, on his second rebound, banging away in front of the net against, you know, one of the toughest teams in the world at that time. Big, strong, tough team, tough defense, and here he is banging away in front of the net as a small player, refusing to leave, refusing to get pushed out of the way. He wanted to score.
He was a pit bull, if you want. He was a kid that was, you know, he was not the tallest guy in the world, but, you know, when you played with him, you feel like you were playing with a guy that's 6'6". You know, he wasn't going to get outworked. He wasn't going to get outmuscled. He was going to do everything he could to make it happen.
One of the first things I said to Danny after playing with him for a little while, I said, don't bother passing it back to me. Once I give it to you, just shoot it. I said, one, you're not very good at it, and two, I'll go get the puck and we'll try it again. He was a shooter and had an incredible ability to get open. And I knew if I went in the corner and if I could come up with a puck, I had Donnie and Danny around the net, and those boys could hang in there and they would bang it into the net, find a way to score.
Danny would go through you, over you, around you, whatever he had to do. And with the other guys, they were such cerebral players.
I remember one night we were in the island. I'll never forget this. And we were in our zone, and we were leading by 1 goal. And I had 19 goals, okay? It's my first year, I believe it was.
Was probably his first chance to play in the last minute of a game with a 1-goal lead, and Donnie won the face-up back into the corner. Instead of going out to his point, Danny saw the puck and went back below the red line, just turned and shot. I remember when he got it, I thought, well, that's good. I like it in his hands, and I'm kind of calling for a pass. He just turned and shot, and I just went, oh, no.
So I'm behind the net, and normally, you know, I had an open shot to the empty net. So I fired it the whole length of the ice, and it went in the net. And I'm going, yeah, 20 goals.
While he's dancing his little jig for his goal, we just went right after him and just stopped it right then and there.
Craig comes over, and you did too. Don't you ever do that again. I said, what? I scored the goal. Don't you ever shoot the puck from there. If you miss the net, it comes back on our end, there's an icing, and they get a chance to score against us.
Here's 2 players telling this kid, and he's all proud of himself, and we said, don't you ever do that again.
Get over the red line if you're going to shoot the puck. Oh, they drilled me. I said, okay, big boys, big brothers, I'll listen to you.
Whenever we had a scrimmage, and we had more scrimmages in those days perhaps than they do now, and it was always us against the connection. Like, we never played in the same group. We never played together. It was always one against the other. And, you know, I perhaps may not have been the best practice player in the world, but if it came to a scrimmage, then I was going to participate for sure. And to play against them, you knew you had to be on top of your game or they're going to make you look bad. So that's the way we approached it. We wanted to make them look bad. We wanted to beat them.
Floyd would play us intentionally against them. the French Connection in practice and stuff. And so I think that, again, as Danny said, that all added to the team aspect, because it doesn't matter how good one line is.
And if you look at our team, we had tremendous rivalries among the lines. If one was good one night, we wanted to be better.
They hated us, didn't they?
They didn't want to play
against us. They
against
never wanted to go against us because we'd beat them all the time, and then they'd go crying and sulking in the corner. But no, we used to have some great battles in practice, and then Gilbert would grab the puck once and go through everybody, and that'd be it. They'd beat us,
or we'd be winning, and then Floyd would give them a penalty shot or something so they could win.
So they could feel better about themselves.
When we played the Connection, the game was on, definitely. And every once in a while, I remember Bert would decide to change the tempo of and he could pick it up, and then it was tough sledding. But it was a great battle, and they would often put Shoney against us too, and just to make sure that we were going to suffer the consequences.
We're playing Boston, and Jim at the time, I'm going to say he's 21 or this might be his second season, and he's playing a very aggressive, robust game. Jim was never a dirty player, was a rough and tough, hard-hitting player, didn't take advantage of players when they were in some distress, wouldn't hit a guy from behind, been known to pat a guy in the back for a good effort and in the corner or something like that. Respected his opponents. But I don't think he had the same feeling for two teams, Boston and Philadelphia. And Jim probably legitimately was, of that era, in the top 5 or 6 toughest guys. He was built like Adonis, and he had a natural physical strength. And he also had trained himself in the martial arts in a way with Freddie Atkinson, who was our physical fitness trainer for Jim's first 2 or 3 years. And I think that helped Jim a lot, gave him a lot of confidence on handling himself in those situations. But it was a matter of, I think it was basically a statement that Jim was making about his team and himself, that Wayne Cashman was their equivalent of Jim Schoenfeld, and Cashman was a good player too. He could play hockey, and I played against him in junior. As a matter of fact, in junior, he didn't nearly have the toughness reputation that he had in the pros. But again, the elements of a team come together and a guy finds his role. I just think it was partly a statement about where the Sabres and the Bruins were going to be as long as Jim Schoenfeld was in the lineup.
Like for me, when I look back, Cash and I went to the corner, and I tried to throw a body check, and he got his elbow up a little bit, and then the doors flew open, and it just seemed the natural thing to do, so we went at it. And then Bobby, because he was a great team guy, if you fight one of our guys, you're going to have to fight all of us. And it wasn't really much of a fight. He sort of grabbed me, and we fell to the ice. There weren't many punches thrown. And then later on, Carl Vadnais, another good team guy, if you're going to fight Cash and Bobby, you're going to have to fight me. So they were the 3 fights that I was involved in. But the thing I remember most is that as I was fighting Carl Vadnais, the bench is emptied. And that's when we all pulled together as a team. I really thought that galvanized us, because now we're all in it for each other.
And then the other thing was Orr had Larry Hellman, had Morley Hellman in a bad position in behind the bench, and damn near choked him to death. He couldn't breathe. He said that. Morley told me it was the closest he ever was dying. He said, I thought he was going to die. I couldn't breathe, and it was at the end of the shift, and I was tired.
That was a secondary brawl. But the
we
main
felt pretty
brawl was in
brave
the
after
corner.
that game. He's right to a certain point. We got all puffed out our chest physically after that.
That just continued, that fight, right all the way down through the Zamboni entrance. Once they went through the boards, there wasn't a guy that hesitated to jump over the boards.
I think the bench is cleared at the Boston Bruins initiative because they felt they were being beat up. And Jim had given a pretty good licking to several of them. And I think the rest of us were responding well enough physically as well. So when the bench is cleared, and that's always something they talk about when benches clear, you say, do you have a choice? No, you have no choice. I was on the bench trying to get off when Ken Hodge grabbed Joe Crozier. So I was kind of on the bench helping Joe not get beat up by Ken Hodge. That's what I remember best. I mean, and it's just a melee or a blur of blue and gold and black and gold on the ice. But I don't recall during the brawl there being much fighting. It was mostly pushing and shoving. The real fighting was what you mentioned before.
The next game in there, it was a little disconcerting. I got a lot of mail that I was going to get shot, stabbed, hung. A lot of people were going to do me in before the game started. You know, it was kind of a joke. I mean, of course, in those days when you got these letters, you had to give them to someone in the organization just so they'd follow through to make sure that the threat wasn't legit. And I think it was the police or the army. Somebody gave me a flak jacket as a PR stunt, and we went in there. And I remember the night before. I do remember this. I'm in my room and I had the flu or the cold or something. I was as weak as a kitten, and I thought, it doesn't matter. You got to play this game. I mean, you can't have the scraps against the Bruins and then go into Boston and not play. Well, sick. If you've got to drag yourself to the rink tomorrow, you go in there and you play. So I didn't sleep that night thinking, you know, am I going to have any strength to do anything? And we got into the game, and as expected, it was as tame as could be. You know, I mean, we just played, both teams played. Boston won the game handily, but there was no repercussion at all.
Really, that was a season in which I think the team really formed a personality. We had the strength, offensive strength of the French Connection. I was on a line for most of the year with Jim Lorentz and Huey Harris or Steve Atkinson from time to time. And we were a really strong second line offensive team line. You know, I scored 30 goals that year. Jim Lorentz had 28, and the other combination probably had you know, the same numbers combined. So when you look at the first two lines we had in terms of our offense, we were a pretty good offensive team. But what really made it, I think, successful was the emergence of Don Luce and Craig Ramsey and Larry Mickey on that line too, as a solid third line and as a checking line, but also a line that could score. You know, Don Luce ultimately scored 30 goals at least once or twice, and he was labeled early in his career as a checker, and that was pretty good. But you know, one of the things I've learned in management and from playing and working with hockey teams is that if you build your team successfully with the right ingredients, one complements the other, and when it's running well, it runs like a smoothly oiled machine.
When we got into that playoff hunt, I mean, we were a very young group of players, and luckily for us, we had a couple of great veteran players, and Timmy Horton and Roger Crozier and Larry Hillman, I think was. So we had some good people around us, and it was a great learning experience to be under that gun and to feel what it was like. And I think we took 88 points in the 72-game schedule just to get in that year and knock out Detroit. And we came down to the very last game of the year that we had to win. And I think we beat St. Louis 3-1, I think it was. And the intensity for that was truly incredible. And then going into Montreal, making the playoffs, going into the old Forum for the first ever playoff game. And I thought, man, I'm going to be nervous. But I really was not. I was certainly on edge, but I wasn't nearly as nervous as I think for a lot of the games down the stretch because this was just so neat to be there, fairly unexpected, but we were in that situation, almost had nothing to lose, and I think Joe Crozier did a great job in saying, you know, a lot of teams are afraid of Montreal, afraid of that defense. We will show them no fear. We're just going to go chase them. And I thought that was pretty cool, and we did. We went after them. We gave them a hard time. I scored the first goal for the Sabres and get us up 1-0, and we ended up losing the first game 2-1. But that was exciting for me to score a goal in the Forum in a playoff game, and then to almost have a chance to win. And then, of course, when we won Game 5 down there, René Robert scored in overtime. That was truly an amazing situation to be part of, coming home and not playing great, but getting that standing ovation and the singing and the thank you Sabres. And I think that really told us a lot about what Buffalo was going to be like and how great a place it was going to be. It was so great to be in that building.
And the fans were unbelievable. Thank you, Sabres. They stood up. I thought that was one of the most emotional things I've seen between a bond between a team and fans, you know, in the National Hockey League for a young team.
Yeah. Well, at that time we had 8 or 9 French-Canadian guys on the team too.
Yes.
So that was playing against the Canadian was really. We were ready for them, you know, but they were ready for us. You know, we gave them a good series, a hard time in Montreal. We beat them in Montreal 1 game, so. And the organization, I know the organization, they were not too happy about it.
Yeah.
In order to look at that season, you really had to look back. We made the playoffs, thought we were great. We were going to be one of the top teams forever, and we were one of the worst teams the next season. We finished, I think, 5th worst, and as the blessing, we got Lee Fogelman and Danny Gare. So suddenly we got 2 guys who cracked our lineup right off the bat, who brought tremendous competitiveness to our team. They both were tough, grinding, hard-working guys that showed up and played every night. So that was a great addition to our team. But our confidence level, we'd been stepped on, and now we were going to fight back, because we're a bunch of people who were not going to be pigeonholed or put down. We wanted to show everybody that we were the best.
We had 3 solid lines. Even our third line was very good, and our defense was pretty solid. You know, our goaltending, you know, at times was hot and cold, but you know, overall we had a pretty darn good team, and it came together so quickly. You know, from when you look at it, starting in 1970 and then '75, you're in the Stanley Cup Finals. So it was fun. There were great times. If you remember, the fans were really behind us, and it was great to play in that building. It was really.
But characters was a big part of that team too. Like when you looked at guys like Brian Spencer and Rick Dudley, you know, you could throw Korab in there. I mean, Shoney was obviously a great player, but there were characters that made that team a little stronger at times, and that was the years of intimidation. It was fighting. It was, you know, the Broad Street Bullies, the Big Bad Bruins.
We had a good balance on the team. You know, if you look at it, you know, we had score, fight, and you know, good defensively, and a lot of power in front. So that's why you need to win.
They were very good, and I really think that. And I don't say this to belittle anybody, but I think that if Roger Croce hadn't get hurt, we would have probably won the Stanley Cup. We were out goaltended. We outplayed them, both physically and skill-wise.
We were very tough, underestimated. Like, we were tougher than any team. At that time, we were the toughest team in the National Hockey League. Yes. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And you can ask our guys. I don't know if their guys would agree with that, but I think we were the toughest team in the NHL if you go top to bottom. That was number one. We were a very talented team. We had people like the Connection, but we had complementary people. Like we had 7 or 8 guys who got 30 goals, and I think Rammer, who was such a great defensive player, was 27. So we had so much ability to go along with the toughness, and then the chemistry, and that's probably the thing that put it over the top, was the fact that we liked each other. We had fun. That was as much fun as you'll ever have as a team, and I think every guy that you'll talk to will say the same thing, how much fun it was to come to the rink that year.
You know, I've been in the game a long time in a lot of different capacities. That's the closest group of men I've ever been involved with. I mean, one year there were 9 wives expecting babies the same season. And we grew up together. You know, in those days there was no salary cap, so teams could stay together for a while. And our families grew up together. You got to know the other person's wife, got to know their children, and you started to care about them. And that's sort of the way it is. We see each other once a year, but you just pick right up. There's no small talk. There's no breaking in. We just pick up where we left off. And those friendships have endured and will continue to endure. And for me, you know, what's the greatest thing about the game? It's that.
We had become as close as any team I've played on, or been associated with. And the team that just won the Stanley Cup in Chicago that I was part of for quite a while, that team was similar to that. The guys like each other. They really liked being at the rink, and we enjoyed going to the rink. We wanted to be there every day. Could hardly wait to get to the rink and see the boys, and that was fun. That was a lot of fun.
The old rinks were kind of cool because the people right on top of you, the stands went straight up. And if you ever walked in the orange section of the old Odd, I mean, you took your life into your hands. And the old buildings like the Boston Garden, the Olympia, it just seemed like people were right on top, more into the game. They can't build them like that anymore, so people are further away, but it did make for exciting games.
And when they raised the roof, I don't believe that was the first or second year, they put in those orange seats. And they got a bunch of people up there, boy, that were just rabid fans. And it just turned everything right to the Buffalo Sabres. they had the benefit of the doubt because of their building. Because, you know, teams would come in and you'd look and it's like those fans were right over you. I mean, they weren't stretched 20 yards back from the ice. They were straight up in the air, and it was good.
I remember coming in here, you know, early on when I was with the Detroit Red Wings, and I remember the fans. It felt like they were just falling on you. You know, the arena, the Aud was an incredible place to play a game. First of all, let alone be the adversary in the rink. There was a lot of hate against the opponents, and you could tell there was a lot of passion for the home team. And it was a phenomenal feeling to walk in here. It was one of the nicest rinks to really play a game because the energy level was so high.
They made you feel so welcome in that building. It was so much fun to play a home game here in Buffalo. I mean, it just, you know, and if it was Toronto or it was Montreal, it was Boston, it was a bigger deal, but it just didn't matter. They loved their hockey, and for us, you know, we were a little bit more crash and bang than some of the guys. You know, you take somebody into the boards there, and you know, it sounded like they just barely made it because there was so much racket.
It really was a lot about the noise. It was, you know, if you hit the boards in the left corner, the glass shook in the far right corner. It was just like a ripple effect, and you know, you almost felt like you killed the guy, and it was like a springboard effect. And really, if, you know, for today's game, we've, you know, tried to get back. Even the boards now are, you know, they're trying to put some flex in them because they got too hard. But the fans being right on top, you knew where certain people sat. You know, the same fan. You were so close to them. You know, the oranges, how they hung over, and they were right on top of you. But it really was, there was some great character.
The Aud was our home, pretty much. You know, we had morning stretches. You'd lay on the ice and look up at the ceiling, and you'd walk the back alleys with the rats, and you would, you know, we spent a lot of time there, a lot of time. Parking lot, underneath, Arthur, the security guard. Like I mentioned earlier, that was really our growing up period into men. You know, we came there as teenagers, and we left there as
I'll tell you one thing,
men,
I didn't really realize how bad the visiting team was.
The dressing room?
Their room, until we got traded away and had to come back into the building. Went, oh my, no wonder nobody wanted to come here. The visiting room was awful.
And our stick room ended right at the end of the visiting room, so Scotty would always sneak back there. It'd be 10 minutes before the game, and no one knew where Scotty was, and he was back behind in Ripper's room, back listening to their coach have their pregame speech. When you play on our team and come back, you can tell your coach that someone's in there listening to you.
Yeah.
So just kind of keep it down.
But it was a special place for not only us, for my family. You know, I can remember skating a warm up, and my dad would come down and warm up, give me the signal that he was in the building. You know, that he had made it down, and you know, going up to the Aud Club after with my family, and.
It was more personal. You were in contact with the fans. Now the players park in their own lot. Right. Everyone's underneath. The people can't get down and see you. We would come out the dressing room, and your friends and family and kids and, you know, people waiting for you. You had to walk right through 300-400 people to get out, and you'd sign all the way out. That part of the game, I think, is missing. I think the contact with the fans, and at the Aud, you were right there. It felt like it was so steep with the oranges there right on top of you, so it was a great atmosphere to play in as well. For us and our skating abilities, it was a great rink to have as our home rink because we didn't have to skate too far.
Thank God, yeah, it was small, yeah.
For me, again, because it was a little bit smaller, it was a little bit easier to play in that building in our end, and I love playing in the Aud.
You know, I really miss the character of the old rinks, and the Buffalo Auditorium was probably one of the best. The year before my rookie year, I got an opportunity to play in the Boston Garden. I got an opportunity to play in the Montreal Forum for a few years. But to play that season here in the Buffalo Aud was special because it's one of those rinks where the fans still get a chance to interact with the players. You feel the presence of the crowd, your fans. A lot of the new rinks, you don't quite have that character anymore. So for me to get to experience that first year in the Aud was special. And a little note too is that to score the last goal in the Aud too, for me was a special moment.
I had long hair. I was a hippie of sorts. And in practice one day, I saw a tennis player, wear a headband, and it and then they talked to them, and they said, keeps the sweat out of my eyes. And I said, I'll try that. So I didn't practice. I just wore it in practice. And we used to draw 3,000 people. It was packed for every practice. And after the couple of practices, people came up to me and were asking me about the headband. And eventually people started asking autographs on headbands. And I said, what the heck, I'm going to try this in a game. So I did, and I got a lot of attention.
Well, he certainly was. The hair was flying all over. I mean, everybody had the long hair. And then he did this one day, put this headband on. We're all going, oh, Duds, what are you doing now?
Almost immediately, the NHL sent out a bulletin that said you can't wear a headband with any lettering on it. And it had to be team colors and all that kind of things. But it gave me a little notoriety on a team that had a lot of personalities, and it made me noticed, I guess, and that was kind of fun.
You know, he had Brian Spencer on one side of Peter McNabb and Big Maxie in the middle. Just Max was this great offensive player who really was more than that, but had great offensive tools and had the two complete whack jobs on his side. Peter thought this was just great, died and went to heaven.
It also made me look a little bit crazier than maybe I actually was, and that didn't hurt either.
Out in Oakland, the one night they went offside, and Brian and Rick just ran into each other, bang. They both had their head down. The headband went flying on one, and the other guy was wacky anyway. And they had to take them off the ice because Peter couldn't take the face off. He was laughing so hard the referee wouldn't drop the puck, and finally put his hands up, and Floyd Smith changed and took them off. And Duds was mad at Spinner, Spinner was mad at Duds, and Peter was just laughing. And so this was the kind of team we had. We had characters. We had a great team. We had a wonderful group of guys.
Only a player can appreciate the things you go through in a season, in a career, that give you enjoyment, give you laughs. You know, I mean, when I first came in, we're taking commercial flights, and commercial flights get canceled. You've got 2, 3, 4 hours in an airport. You got to fill the time somehow, and usually it's kind of a prank on somebody. Whether it's a teammate or some poor passerby, it doesn't matter.
Whenever you're delayed in airports, when you flew commercial, the boys had come up with some gimmicks, and the old dollar bill on a piece of thread, and people go to pick it up and you pull it, and everybody laughs, that one. But I remember one time this guy's running through the airport trying to catch a flight, obviously, and he's full going, and he flies by me, and I went, my wallet, stop that guy, he's got my wallet. Well, some big guy back there, you know, down the corridor a ways, and I'm screaming this, and he sees this guy running and me yelling, hey, he's got my wallet. And I just thought, you know, funny joke, the guy looks, well, this guy stepped into him and, I mean, laid him out, and the poor guy's on the floor in the middle of the airport, luggage all over, and I hope he made his flight. Okay, it was embarrassing because I went, oh my God, oh, I found it, it's right here. Yeah, it took off.
Who's a better prankster, you or Lindy Ruff?
Lindy, by far, the best. I mean, I think he dreams and sleeps on it all night long. He's had some of the funniest things with you know, as a teammate. There was always something going on. You always had to keep, you know, stay sharp.
Lindy's stuff is legendary. The stuff he would do, and his stuff would be what you would expect, and then he would do a right turn. I'll give you. One time, there was the dental floss trick where you'd tie $5 to a roll of dental floss in an airport and throw it on the floor, and you know, people would come off the planes and they'd go to grab it, and you'd pull it back out of the aisle, and of course all of us knew what was coming, and eventually the people that were sitting around us saw it, and we would all laugh at this poor guy or gal that was chasing the $5, and they'd get it too, and they'd walk away. So this would go on for a while, and it was always fun. Well, one day Lindy did it one better. He borrowed $5 from Tony McKegney, who was tighter than bark on a tree. Lindy finally, Lindy's doing the joke, we're all chuckling. Finally, Lindy just gets tired. He's had enough of it, so he lets the guy pick up the $5 and take it. Lindy could care less, because it wasn't his $5, and away he goes, and McKegney lost it. Chased the guy down, and I don't know if he ever got his $5 back. That wasn't the funny part of the joke. The funny part was Lindy just let the guy have it.
I remember Mark Napier came. It's a funny story. It was his first day with our team, and we're at Sabreland, And we just showered, and Mark comes out, and he's trying to put his jeans on, and he can't find the zipper. And the zipper got stuck way, way down in the bottom of the pants, right? And so he's trying to find a zipper to pull up. He can't understand it. You know, his first day with the new team, and his zipper doesn't work. And so he's thinking, like, embarrassed a little bit because he's got pants that the zipper doesn't work. And anyway, he's turned around trying to, you know, fiddle with it. And then we're all in the know, and we're all kind of, you know, undoing skates and kind of looking away and looking at him, looking away. And then he turns the corner to go into the bathroom area to see what the hell's going on. And 20 guys pile in behind him, and there he is trying to fiddle with the bottom of the zipper, not knowing that Lindy had sewn it all the way down into the bottom, and he could never get it out. And so we died laughing. But just little things like that, you know, that kind of kept it light, but brought the team together.
I remember probably one of my favorites was when you and I roomed together in Philly, and you were reading a book. I had come to the room early. You didn't know I was in the room. There was a room behind the curtain, and so I'm standing behind the curtain. Larry's reading his book. He gets up and he goes into the bathroom. He leaves his book sitting on the bed. So I get out from behind the curtain. I take his book and I go back behind the curtain. And Larry comes and sits back in the bed. He lays down and he's looking. Now he's starting to mutter to himself, like, you know, where'd I put the book? And he's looking under the covers, under the pillow. And he walks back into the bathroom, and now he's shaking his head, and it's like, geez, what the hell did I do with the book? And he started walking towards the curtain, and I thought, geez, maybe he sees me. So, like, about a foot away, I go to jump out. Well, I scare the living heck out of him, and he, fortunate enough for me, he didn't throw any punches. But
did he ever have you be an accomplice to any of this pranks, or did you ever try to get Lindy with a good prank?
We always were an accomplice, and we always were the guy that every once in a while that he would target. So we were on the receiving end and on the giving end, and there was a lot of times, a lot of shoe shines, you know, taking the sour cream right underneath the buffet table where everybody walked by, and he wouldn't just get one guy, he got 20 guys, you know, so nobody knew who to blame. And then, you know, at the end of it, we're realizing, okay, the only guy not here is Lindy, and where the hell is he? He's under the buffet table.
There's a lot of funny stories and pranks, and one of the best stories I heard was the story in Lindy Ruff, who's still coaching the team, wasn't playing one night, and he went and switched all the keys on the keychains. And of course, you would fly in late that night. And rumor has it that they got in at like 1:30 in the morning, and it's cold in Buffalo, obviously. And everybody was going to their car, and they pulled out their car keys, and none of the keys worked. But there was one guy driving away with his lights on, and that was Lindy.
But by far my favorite story was when we played the exhibition game in Toronto, and we pulled a bus up to the Holiday Inn, and we're all on the bus of all the team, and Phil is missing, and Scotty up the front of the bus, kind of gruff, go, Mike Ramsey, go find Phil, because they were both from Minneapolis. So Mike goes to walk out of the bus, and just as he gets out, Phil's walking out of the hotel with his girlfriend. You know, like nobody had their girlfriend around training camp, but Phil, he was 18, he was, you know, I think just naive, and so Mike turns around and gets on the bus. Well, Phil keeps walking and gets on the bus with his girlfriend, and they walk like 8 rows back and sit down, and now the bus is just dying, you know, because and you can hear Scotty talking to Jimmy Robertson. Jimmy, go talk to him. And so back Jimmy came, and they had to tell him, you know, no girlfriends on the bus. I mean, he had a lot better playing moments. That's probably one of my favorite off-ice stories with Phil, though.
I got one.
I thought you might.
Well, actually a few, but one good one. Shoney always was was a prankster in the dressing room, trying to set most people up. So I think we won a pretty big game. He was in the shower, and I think he convinced. I'd already showered and got dressed. I think he told Donnie Edwards. He says, "Go tell Smitty I need to talk to him about where we're going tonight," or something. I can't remember what it was for. But and meanwhile, he's got a bucket of ice water in the shower ready for me. But I got my suit on already, so I took my suit off, and I went over and put Shoney's suit on. And then as I peeked around the corner and then jumped out to see what he needed, the bucket was on its way already. And then I think Shoney noticed just as the water was halfway there that it was his suit that I had on. So I think he ended up going leaving in a sweatsuit
I
that
went out
night.
naked that night, yeah. It was a big night in the city.
So Donnie tipped me off that he had a bucket of ice water there, and we turned it around on him.
Good job, Smitty. How are you?
The worst thing that Rob's ever done to a hockey player, and I would think that I'm the recipient of it.
Oh, Hartford.
And why not? You know, we're here to celebrate 40 years for Buffalo.
Gordy Donnelly and I.
Gord Donnelly and Rob Ray, my fighting partners through that season. We're going to initiate the rookie. We went. I love chocolate. I scraped the bottom of the plate. I licked the plate if I could. I love chocolate so much. Rob and Gord went to the variety store and bought a bar of X-Lax. And they shaved the X-Lax on my coconut.
We were in Hartford. We had a team dinner.
On my coconut cream pie, and I couldn't believe how much chocolate was on my plate. I loved it, and I licked every part of that plate. And needless to say, we played an afternoon game the next day. I fell asleep between the periods. John Lucker was going to send me to Rochester in a rant, and Patty LaFontaine actually went to bat for me, and actually went into his office and said, "Listen, you can't send that kid down. This is why he doesn't feel."
And then he called us in, gave us trouble. We sat for like 3 games, never got dressed.
Are you kidding me? I didn't get off
Because
the
this
toilet
little
for 4
boy,
days, so you know,
this little boy we picked
I'd
up.
rather you sit in the locker room.
I've been here for 20 years, and this is the first time I've heard the story.
It's awful.
Serious?
It's awful. Awful.
Oh. We used to ride together a lot to practice, and if Shoney thought it would take 31 minutes and 12 seconds to get to the rink, that's when we'd leave at 31. If the wind was going the right way, we got there on time. But he was in a position where it didn't matter. I was in a position at that time where I couldn't be late for practice. But somehow it worked, but he didn't care.
Yeah, we actually drove so much together, we developed our own language, which we called Shildney, which was speaking English phonetically backwards. So we could be in a crowd and we could carry on this conversation. It was actually quite rude, but we could say whatever we wanted about whoever we wanted, and no one knew it. So we'd be laughing like imbeciles, and most people scratching their head at what we were saying. But we got pretty proficient at it.
All trying to figure it out.
Oh yeah, yes. Rick Dudley thought he had it. He was quite proud when he figured it out, and Tony McKegney, he used to like to try to figure it too, but. Yeah, they're just the goofy things guys do.
One example or one story, and I think people did know about it at the time, but it was just a great example of our youth and our love for one another, and was during that cup run, myself, Curtis Brown, Wayne Primo, Jason Woolley, and Eric Rasmussen, we play PlayStation in the hotel room all the time, even at home, because we stayed at the hotel the night before the games, and we play Xbox, we order grilled cheese sandwiches and banana splits, and spent hours and hours playing video games. So I laughed when I was watching Chicago Blackhawks and they're talking about them playing video games. They robbed our idea, and that's why they were successful. Unfortunately, we were 1 win short, 2 wins short that year, but I think it's just a great sign when you can see guys kind of put the egos and the pride aside and say, we're kids and we love what we're doing, and we don't care what anybody thinks about it, and that was basically what we were all about.
When you leave the game, there's 2 things you miss. You miss being on the ice and hanging out and laughing with the guys.
But everybody took it in the right vein. It was always just ended up in a big laugh, and that's what I say. The great memories of just being with the guys. It always ended up with no one had their feelings hurt. We got a good laugh, and then you moved on to the next time.
That was a lot of fun.
I felt that our team was too slow. Collectively, not individually. Some players were really fast, but as a team generally, we weren't fast enough to put pressure on the puck in the offensive zone when we didn't have it as a collective.
I went over to the World Championships in Moscow in, I think it was '88, and Alex was playing there, and Fedorov was playing there. And he was a player at that point that just jumped off the page at you. His ability was unbelievable, and I'd never seen a guy that could skate as fast and still do things with the puck, at full speed, and his speed was probably as fast as anybody in the National Hockey League.
We were drafting in the 4th round. We had 2 picks, and we picked I think we picked our first pick. I forget who it was. It's in the record book. But the 2nd, 4th round pick coming along, or it was the reverse, I said, we're going to use the 2nd one to take a gamble. And the scout said, what do you mean? I said, well, we're going to take Alexander Mogilny with this. And they said, oh, we'll never get him out. And I said, he's 18 years old. Even if we have to wait 8 years, he'll be ours. In those days, you held on to the player's rights until he left his home country.
So we drafted him, and the next year, I saw him again at the World Championships in Anchorage, Alaska. And it was funny because I hadn't met him until I saw him in Anchorage, and he had just played a game, and I forget the team they beat, but they just kind of beat them. And I said to Alex, I said, you're a goal scorer. Like, when are you going to score some goals? And he kind of understood, but he said in broken English, he said, next game Canada, I score 3. And he did. And that's the kind of he's a very confident kid, but he had unbelievable tools.
Donnie came back from Anchorage. I said, so how was he? He said, well, he was only the best player in the tournament. He scored 3 goals and then sat in a rocking chair for the rest of the game that they won. He had won, and then he went from winning the World Junior Championship to the Olympics in Stockholm. And I said, well, that's great. We'll just stay in touch with him and say hello to him when we can. And if it ever opens up, we know we've got a superstar player. I think that May, we had been bounced out of the playoffs by either Boston or Montreal, I forget which. And I'm sitting at home. I get a call from Don. He said, I got a call from a guy who says he represents Alexander Mogilny. He wants to meet us in Stockholm. They had just finished playing in the Worlds. And I said, let's get some plane tickets. We can't afford not to go, even if it's called Seymour. He said, well, you got to go. Even if it's a phony, you got to find out. So we are on the next plane to Stockholm that night, get there the next morning, and we call the guy who purported to be his agent, a guy named Sergei Fomichov, who ultimately ended trying to extort money from him, who came back to Buffalo. Sergei said, meet us at this particular hotel, and we went to the hotel, and he's sitting on the sofa with Alex, and I'm sitting on the other side with Don and chairs. And so I looked at him. Of course, I'd seen his picture, but I'd never met him. And I said, is that him? He says, that's him. So I said, well, Alex, are you prepared to come to North America, give up your family, face whatever repercussions in Russia you're going to face? Yes. So I said, what's the next step? He said, we'll meet you such and such a place tomorrow. We met them in kind of uncertain circumstances and had to make a dash for it. Whether it was staged or not, I don't know. Spent the next couple of days handling the paperwork. I was in constant touch with the director of the INS here in town, getting direction from him in the State Department. But essentially, once he got his temporary status, we then had to wait to get out of town. And so we kind of went off into the wilderness of Stockholm for a little bit of time until we can get the final documents, and got the documents in the middle of the night the next couple of days, and then went to the airport at dawn and got through security without a hint of opposition. And we got through security, and by that time we're in international space. And so Alex turns around and said to me, am I free now? I said, yes, you're free. Oh. He just kind of looked and went over to the bar and had a morning coffee, and then we waited for the plane and came here. But the remarkable thing was that we're on the plane coming home from Stockholm, and this isn't secret, this is obviously public record. This is when I realized the enormity of it, because we'd had nothing in Stockholm or in Sweden that indicated, all we'd seen is a paper that Mogilny gone missing. He hadn't reported to his team hotel the day before. We get over here, and there's an announcement as we're coming into JFK. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at JFK shortly. Please stay on the plane. The FBI are coming on to conduct an examination. The FBI and the INS are coming on to conduct an examination of a passenger and his companions. So we land. The FBI and the INS come on, and we identify ourselves, show our passports, and says, come with us. So we walk into the airport to a special place, and there might have been the airport manager or somebody came to me and said, you're going to have to go talk to the media. And I say, why? He says, because there's about 1,000 of them out there right now. It's hit the international press. Well, while we're on the plane, he had called his mother to say goodbye. And love you, and I'll see you when I can, but I'm following my dream. And I guess either she called the coach or it was intercepted by whoever. And it was the front page news in New York when we arrived that evening. And there was probably not 1,000, I would say probably several hundred media people asking questions. Of course, I'm under strict silence instructions, not only from my bosses, but from the government, because he's still under examination. He's not yet out of the woods. He's still under examination as whether or not he legitimately has the right to be considered a refugee. So we have this press conference and we arrive in we take the flight to Buffalo. Same thing happens at Buffalo again. Smaller group, but the same thing. This is probably 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And it was, the enormity of it and the importance of it gradually hit. We conducted a press conference in the Odd Club that was attended by hundreds of journalists from around the world. I had my house in the front page of papers all over Europe. And of course, I got to get a kick out of it. My daughter was scared and my wife was scared, but when you're young and full of, once the adrenaline gets going, and you don't stop. You go through and finish it. And he impressed at first shift on the ice. He had an adjustment time for the summer because this is the off season. But we saw him at training camp and we knew that we'd secured a very, very valuable asset. Something that would have cost us millions of dollars if we'd tried to negotiate a release, and something that, because of his status as a refugee, it cost us millions of dollars to pay him, mind you, but at least we didn't have to pay the release. So it was sanctioned by the NHL. There was no wrongdoing, and he became a big part of the Sabres history.
When he first came over here, he was very, very confident in his ability to play, but yet he's going to a new country. He was very private. He didn't know how things worked over here, and I think a lot of his personality was misread. I think that he's a very intense kid. At that time, he wanted to win. He wanted to do his best, and a lot of things he didn't understand here. So he would be, maybe people would say, standoffish, but he didn't want to put himself in a situation where he didn't understand. Which, I mean, he lived with us for a while, and so I got to know him pretty well. He was a very sincere, very honest guy who really wanted to do his best.
One thing I remember in training camp, Duds used to have this, his 18 laps. Before it was Camp Tortorella, it was Rick Dudley, and he would tie the rope between the nets, and we had to do the 18 laps. And when Alex first came, he didn't really speak the language at all, and he wanted to be with the guys. So you did your 18 laps, and when you're skating, he wouldn't take his feet off the ice. He was just pumping his legs, and he stayed in the middle of the pack.
And we were dead.
And Duds was getting mad at him. He was mad and yelling at him. So the next time, you have to do it 3 times. The next time he did it, he started yelling at Alex. I think he might have stopped us and told Alex to get going. If Alex didn't get skating, we were all going to have to skate another time. And he still just stayed in the middle of the pack, pumping his legs, which is a hard thing to do. And the third time, Duds finally started yelling at him. And Phil Housley was probably a half a lap ahead. While the rest of us were in a pack, Howie was off on his own doing his thing. And Alex just kicked into gear and started skating. He caught Housley, passed Housley. And that just kind of showed us his skating ability, what he could do.
Yeah, he was, I think some of the language barrier was self-imposed, should I say that?
Yeah.
A lot of times people would come up to talk to him and he would go, I don't speak English, but he was speaking English to us.
Yeah.
It was interesting because he was staying in the hotel, and we had the training camp out at the old Saberland, and he shows up. There he is, and got his skates, and we put him in equipment, and he's skating around, and we're all kind of looking at him, and he's playing the old "I don't speak English" card to everybody. But he and I hit it off right away, and so he was a little bit younger than I was, but I got along great with him, and I found out right away that he was fluent in English. So I just let it go. I didn't tell anybody, and so he used to come over to my house and have dinners and relax, able to relax. But he was a very, very interesting young man, and tremendous talent, probably the most talented guy I've ever played with.
He was the first guy to come over, and it opened the doors for a lot of other players, and that's a huge step. I mean, you know, you think about a 19-year-old kid leaving the United States to go live in Russia, you know, and play when he's not even supposed to leave. You know, it took a lot of intestinal fortitude to do what he did.
Just things that he went through, because he didn't understand what was going on, and he was a young guy, and he left his family at home, and I think his family went through an awful lot at the beginning too. To be able to do what he did was truly amazing, and he was a really intelligent guy that, you know, never spoke a lot and never really allowed a lot of people to get to know him. But if you did get to know him, he was an intelligent guy that knew what was going on, knew what he wanted to do, and he did it extremely well, and he was pretty dedicated.
He was the one, and he probably was, as was often said to me, his name and picture was on the president's desk at all times, because this was a time of very delicate. The wall was about to fall and did fall shortly after that. The other Russian players started coming out. Clubs began to realize, I'm surmising this, that logically they began to realize that we can either hold them back and get nothing for them, or we can let them go and at least negotiate something ongoing. And at that time, the NHL and Russians were starting to understand each other a little better. I think they realized that the NHL was ready to accept European players, especially Russian players, as frontline players. And the Russians were going through their own turmoil. Their Russian Federation group was as much politically under stress as the country was. So the timing was pretty good for all those young Russian kids to get over here and start establishing themselves, and they really have. Well, it was all part of the Alexander Mogilny acquisition, actually. I wasn't expecting Mogilny to arrive on our doorstep until probably he'd played at least another Olympics, which would have been 4 more years. And then it would be a heavy price to pay to get him out of there, even if we could, because he and Bure and Fedorov were the meat of the Russian Olympic team for the next 15 years to come. When we get the call after the season that he wants to come out, was when I started to realize that if we're going to have a guy like Mogilny on our team who can outrace a rabbit from a dead stop with the puck in control and shoot it like a rocket from 60 feet, I said we need to get a lot faster, better support for him. Pierre had to be in the deal with LaFontaine. They wanted Mogilny. And I said to Bill Torrey, I said, that's why we're trading for LaFontaine, because we need a guy to play with Mogilny, who is as fast as him and as creative as him. So Mogilny's not in the deal. So he said, okay, what about Turgeon? I said, well, actually, that was the guy I thought would be a fair trade, basically because I admired Pierre a lot. He had a great couple seasons, and he was a real good young man. But Pierre was the kind of a player that didn't speed the game up. He was crafty, you know, and he was the kind of guy that would work his way down the ice. But he wasn't an explosive player. He was a cagey, chess-playing kind of guy. And I could see him and Mogilny together, and I didn't see it fitting. And I didn't see Pierre as a second-line guy. And I didn't see us making the trade to LaFontaine without one of those two guys going. So that's basically the story behind it. I waited a year to make it happen. And Torrey and I talked about it for over a year because he was trying to save the guy. He thought, yeah, I don't want to see LaFontaine not finish his career as an Islander. But he had a tough agent who had a demand, and he held out, and I think it became something that they realized was inevitable. The blood had turned sour, and they had to make the move.
I was excited. Obviously, when you're not playing, it's tough sitting at home. But when I heard it was the Sabres and knew that they had some talent, obviously, in Mogilny and Hawerchuk and Andrechuk, I got excited. And a lot of other players, obviously. And when I first went there, it was like, I think when you get traded for the first time, it's tough leaving and it's tough being traded, but then it's like being a rookie all over again. Things are fresh, things are new, and I was really excited to go to Buffalo.
I think Pat, garnished a lot playing with Alex. Alex could, he was arguably maybe the best player in the league. That he could dominate a game, dominate teams. He was just unbelievable as far as I was concerned, And with Pat, they hit it off together, and they, you know, on the power play, you wouldn't want to face them too often.
You know, chemistry and the style of play. Coach Muckler had a high tempo. Both, you know, Coach Muckler at the time and of course Coach Ted Nolan came in later, but they like high tempo, you know, a lot of speed, a lot of forechecking, a lot of pressure. And Alex is one of the most, if not the most talented player I've ever played with or watched in practice, and watched his skill and his speed from blue line to blue line. I still say he's the fastest guy I've ever seen, just from a dead start, blue line to blue line. You're not going to catch him. And then we had Dave Vanderchuk, and really we ended up, I think, trading Dave later that year. And I think if we would have kept Dave, we would have been the only line in the history of hockey where all three players actually scored 50 goals in one season. He ended up going to Toronto and scoring 55, I believe. But you know, Alex had great speed, and Dave Vanderchuk had great hands in front of the net. And we had a real potent power play with Howard Chuck and Mogilny and Audette. It just seemed there was a sixth sense. I would kind of have a sense where Alex would be, and vice versa, and then Dave would come in and great hands in front of the net, you know, picking up rebounds, you know, tipping pucks, and it was just a real good mix.
Pat was a pretty smart kid. He talked to Alex all the time, and there was a certain bond there, and he was just looking for his tape, you know, and Pat did a good job with his speed to get open and create those passing lanes, and Andy had such a good knack and feel for the game that he knew where to go. He didn't have to skate. He just went to a spot and he knew where to go. So that was a pretty unique line.
Yeah, that was a magic year. I mean, one of the things I can remember is at the time I was the chairman of the general managers committee, so we used to meet all the time, 3 or 4 times a year in groups and sessions and so on. Harry Sinden used to say, those two guys are the best 2 hockey players in the league right now. The only problem LaFontaine's got is if Lemieux comes back from his cancer, and which he did and won the scoring championship, I think, in the last week, playing about 30 fewer games. You know, the remarkable thing about that year for Alex, he scored 76 goals, I think, whatever the number was. And he probably missed 15, 20 breakaways. Missed with a shot, you know, he was legitimately not that far away from scoring 100 goals.
His personality, he was just quiet. He liked to be the guy that kind of sat in the corner and, you know, just kind of blended in. And then he would kind of streak into the limelight for a little bit, get into his business, and then kind of hide back in the corner again. And you had to know that about Alex. His personality was similar to the way he played. He was very dynamic. All of a sudden, you'd see him darting up the ice, make a couple of quick moves, and the next thing you know, he'd score a big goal, and then he would kind of skate off to the side. And he really didn't want all that attention, but his skill was so great and his talent was so great that, you know, I remember telling him, yeah, Alex, just give me the puck and go to the net, go to your spots, and you know, let's work off of each other. And we got Dave Vanderchuk here coming up and picking up any of the extra, you know, in the slot, any extra pucks.
I remember stepping on the ice training camp first time and seeing him and Patty going, I don't know if this is the right league for me. They were that good. They were incredible. The 2-step from him getting a breakaway, and Patty was just obviously an unbelievable player.
And a person.
Yeah.
You know, Patty was the nicest guy in the world, and you know, he was probably too nice to play the game. That was his problem. He should have been. He was so good at it, but you know, you see him now. He's so successful at other things because the type of person he is. But during the game, probably in that era, he was probably way too nice. My biggest memory of Pat LaFontaine was we had a big fight in Chicago Stadium, and Belfour, everybody was in it, and I had 2 guys just giving it to me. Patty literally crawled under the pile, and he stuck his gloves out to me, and he says, raise it, and I'm like, I'm looking, trying to see, and the others are hitting me. He says, put your face in here, it'll protect you, put your face in my gloves. So he literally, you know, crawled under the pile, give me his gloves to put on my face to protect from these 2 guys hammering away at me. So that was the kind of guy he was.
He gave him for the other 300 fights.
He was a little too late.
Go back to my father, who taught me at a young age, in order to make the National Hockey League, there were 3 things I had to do. He said, son, you have to have, you know, good upper body strength, and you have to come and work out in the gym 3 times a week. He says you have to have an asset, which was my shot, my wrist shot, and he said you have to shoot like I was doing, you know, at the time at 13, 300 to 400 pucks a day under our sun deck. And then the third one was, he says you have to learn how to box, and I said, box? He says, yeah, you have to learn how to fight. And I said, oh, okay, so those was the times when, you know, the game was very physical. You had the big bad Bruins, you had the Broad Street Bullies, and I went on to junior and playing junior and broke the penalty minutes for the most by a right winger ever and most goals in my last year in junior. So I think that's the reason why, a big part of me obviously getting drafted in the National Hockey League. But you know, those were the days where you had to go in and earn your stripes. I mean, not only could you have to score goals, but you had to fight. I used to go into Boston, and it would be Jonathan, Secord, Wensink, O'Reilly, Schmotz, you name it. Those guys were coming after you, and it wasn't fun. It was not a fun thing to do. Your bed would be soaking wet, perspiration, thinking about it. You know, it was an anxious time, nervous times. You go into Philadelphia, it was the same way. That's why the flu was named after, you know, the Philly flu. It was guys that couldn't deal with the pressure or the stress. But that was the war. That was the battle that you had to deal with.
It's the one playoff game. We were playing the Islanders, and we had Gillies, Bossy, and Trottier as our line to play against every night. And everybody knows Bossy, a big scorer, but Trottier was one of the most underrated players, even though he's a Hall of Famer, because he was just hard. He was hard to play against, and he'd try to hurt you, which he eventually did hurt me. And Gillies is a big, tough guy. And Danny's playing against Gillies, and I can see tickets getting ornery. So after the second period, I said to him, look, we've got them. We're out playing them. Leave that guy alone. That's this little squirt against this big guy, and I'm telling him, leave this guy alone. And he said, well, I said, no, stop. Leave him alone. First shift of the third, the gloves are off, and Danny's throwing haymakers at this guy up over the top. No, my God. On their way to the penalty box, Gillies just said, nice fight. I mean, it was a tremendous fight. Danny was such a tough competitor, and he could fight, and he could fight anybody, and did. But I thought he could get hurt against Gillies, but he didn't. Of course, he hung in there, and he went toe-to-toe with one of the biggest, toughest guys in the game. And that's typical of Danny, that he was going to show no fear to anyone, and he was not about to back down.
Scrappy to me was a part of, it gained me ground. It gave me an opportunity to stand up for my teammates and myself, and I think that was a lot about what Buffalo Sabres were about. And when I came to this town, was the fact that it was a hard-working, blue-collar town that they loved to see people stand up for themselves. So I fit the mold, I guess.
When I came in, I never came into the league as a fighter. I wanted to be a good hockey player, and for me to be a good hockey player, I had to play a physical game. You know, I wasn't a nifty guy. And going back to that era, if you're going to play a physical game, you know, push is going to come to shove. So you ended up, you know, even the Bruin night, you know, the other 2 fights were initiated by Bruins. You know, I'm just trying to play a hard game. And so what happens is, you know, people take exception to the way you play. You have your scrap, and I was doing okay. You know, I was winning my share, and then there were less takers. There were less people that would take exception to a clean hit. You know, it's part of the process. And then you look around and you're thinking, you know, you see this guy was a scrapper who's not a very good player, and he's not playing anymore, and this guy the same thing. And I thought I better become a better hockey player, because I wanted to stay in the league. I wanted to be a good hockey player. I wanted to be a player that would scrap for his teammate. You know, I mean, if I go back to my first year, Joe the Crow came to me in St. Louis. And they had a tough team. I didn't know. As I said, I'm a kid. I don't know. And he says, look, I want you to go up, and he named a few players. He says, you let them know that if the going gets tough out there, you'll handle things. You just tell them to play their game. I said, oh, sure. You know, so I did that, and I don't remember what happened in the game. I don't know if it had an impact, but I thought there was a little honor in it. You know, I thought, you know, I'm doing something for this guy to help him play better. And that's sort of how I looked at scrapping. I thought, you know, there's honor in this because I'm doing it for a teammate.
And Shoney was in a lot of those. I mean, I saw him in a fight one night in Chicago, and I'm trying to remember who he was fighting, but it was one of the greatest fights I've ever seen, and he just went toe-to-toe, and and he ended up winning that fight. But just moments like that, away from, you know, what you do with the puck and make a skilled play, plays and guys like Shoney sticking up for you and sticking up for his teammates and for himself really means a lot to a team.
I've had a ringside seat for quite a few really good fights, and one of them was
in the Garden.
It was in the Gardens. Brian Kern comes out on the ice, and I'm taking the face-off, I believe, and Larry is playing left wing, and Colonel ends up saying, Larry, I got to fight you, and Larry's going, I don't think you want to fight me, because I got to fight you. While the puck drops, we hear, and Colonel's down.
But the 8 or 9 of us at the face-off were listening to these guys talk during a commercial break, so we were all knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
The 13,000 people in the Gardens had no idea, but we're on the ice, and there's nothing really any of us could do other than, I don't want to fight you. I don't want to fight you. It didn't last long.
No, it didn't last long. And you know, he was one of those players that you know, you'd learn to appreciate more after he was, you know, not in your lineup.
There was nobody that was going to take advantage of our team with Larry there, and early on with Schoenfeld there. You know, after some of those guys had left, it was still he was the guy that was able to settle the other team down and say, hey.
It was different back then. Everybody, you know, Derek Smith would fight once a year. I mean, everybody. Danny Gare would fight, Lindy, me, and Mike Ramsey, of course. But it was a different game than it is today. And you know, everybody did what they had to do, and our team was pretty close. And you know, if you hurt one of us, somebody else was there to kind of look out for them, and you know, that's just how it was. There was lots of times when I thought, okay, whoever's a tough guy on the other team.
Playoffs, you and Secord, you know, when we had to start in Chicago and the building's rocking, and like I'm out there and I'm thinking, I mean, you can't even hear in the old stadium, and I get in a fight like my first shift, and then Larry's like a few shifts later with Secord, and he gets in the box. He said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "I just wanted to get that out of the way early." You know? But it was those fights you had with Secord were incredible. You know, it was like. I said, I don't want to be involved in any of those. I said, that's a guy built for Larry, not for me.
But like you know, Lindy's sloughing off the stuff that he would bring to the table. And this is, I'm not telling you this to put air in his tires, but you know, we played that Quebec series that he referenced a while ago, and they had a guy that was Looney Tunes on their team, a kid named Jimmy Mann. And it was in the old building on the Zamboni side of the rink. And Lindy's going back to get the puck, and Jimmy Mann is coming after him 100 miles an hour, and he's going to put Lindy right through the glass. And Jimmy Mann was one of those guys that, you know, I would think to myself, okay, you know, you'd sit in your stall before the game and you'd look through guys and you go, okay, the only guy really going to worry about here is Mann. He's left-handed, he's pretty tough, he's goofy, not sure if he's going to jump me, and just, you know, that was the guy you'd always worry about.
Put him in the real tough category.
Yeah, that's right.
Put him in the real tough, yeah.
So you know, I know if I got to go with someone, that's who it's going to be. Well, this Lindy stops just short of the boards and leans back and stiff shoulders Jimmy Mann, and that was it. Jimmy was done for that game and the next one, and you know, so he's saying what a neat thing was to have me on the bench. I'm telling you what, then we go into, not that same year, a couple of years later, we go into the Rangers, and Nick Fotiu was acting like a hillbilly, you know, and there's another guy, you look at the lineup, you go, hey, if I don't have to fight him, I'd just as soon not. And you know, Lindy wasn't. If he was scared, he didn't show it. I mean, we were all scared going out on the ice. But you know, there's another guy. You go, okay, I don't have to fight him. All right, Lindy took care of business. So that kind of admiration for each other. Mike Ramsey was another one.
I got to fess up. I fought scared a lot of times.
We all did.
Bobby Bugner told me a story. We played, and you played with Boogie after as well, and I played with him in Colorado, and we're still good buddies. Boogie told me a story. He was teammates with Craig Berube. And Berube was in Washington. The following year, you guys went to the semifinals. Berube and Hunter, it's Mark Hunter, or Dale Hunter. They would actually get together. They'd each get a six-pack. This is a true story. Buy a six-pack of beer. They'd go over to each other's houses when they knew Buffalo was playing on a TV game just to watch us play because they had so much fun watching it. So that's coming from other players, which to me, I think that's really cool.
I work with Barry Melrose now, and he had a great line when they used to host NHL Tonight on ESPN. he said this year, he goes, I used to watch it, and I know teams did not want to blow you out. If they had like a 2-goal lead at the end of the game, they wanted to keep it close because they just didn't want you guys. They didn't want you guys going nuts because we had guys that would grab their scores and lay beatings on them. We had our tough guys that would go after, and no one likes to fight when you're up by 2 or 3 goals. If you're down, you have that extra mentality that you want to do something to prove something that you're embarrassed almost. But a lot of teams were fearful of us.
When you're out there doing what you did, it distracted the whole other team. Sometimes it was frustrating for us because you would stir things up and you'd have to go and deal with it. But the benefits of what you did probably paid more dividends on the positive side because, you know, you had guys worrying about you and chasing you all over the ice, whether it was a player, whether it was a goaltender, was it a coaching staff, was it, you know, the bench player. You had them so distracted so many times that other guys in the team could go play their game, do their thing, catch people off guard, and be successful that way because of that. And I think too many people just look at it and go, oh, you're just a rat, you know, this and that, you're causing trouble. Well, yeah, you did it for a reason.
At the end of the day, I wanted to draw a penalty. And whether it was taking a punch in the face or calling a guy's wife or whatever it may be, you can bleep that, right? Whatever it may be, there was nasty things said, but it was all calculated. It was trying to get a guy to take a penalty so we could score on the power play, which would have been nice to get on the power play and score a few of those goals, but it was all for everything, I think, all put together. Draw the penalty, enjoy the fights, and
what you said, it was calculated. I think a lot of people, and sometimes the coach looked at us too, that you guys are out of control, you're doing what you're doing. But not understanding what you were trying to do, that it was calculated, and it was something we always talked about, and it was something going into the game, you know, you knew who we could pick on, and you knew who you could get under their skin and take advantage of them, and not everybody looked at it that way and understood it, that there was work done, there was planning done to get to that part.
I remember one of probably my biggest experience was in training camp was trying to make the team my first year and going into the Philadelphia Spectrum playing, you know, the Philadelphia Flyers that won the Stanley Cup the year before. And I remember going in there with 18,000 screaming maniac rabid fans in Philadelphia, and they had just won the cup, and they had Kate Smith up in the Jumbotron and whatever else that the fans were all excited. They brought the cup out. So I'm like, you know, I'm just like nervous as all heck and anxious, trying to get on the ice and getting this game going. But we started out with Luce and Craig Ramsey, our line, and we went up against Bobby Clark, Selesky, who was a big tough guy, and then Dave Schultz, who was right next to me. So I figured I got to do something to try to get onto this team. And so I ran Dave through the end boards, the hammer as they called them, and I could hear the crowd go, whoa, whoa. And then I could smell him coming back on my neck on the way back, and I went left, and he went right like a bit of a fool and went in the board. So, oh boy, that was this. You knew something was going to happen as we came up the middle of the ice. He jumped me. They have a bench clear. We have a bench clear, and it goes on in about the first 15 seconds of my exhibition, first tilt in the National Hockey League. But I remember after he's saying, hey, you little midget, what are you, the new tough guy for the Sabres? I said, yeah, you got a problem with that big boy? And it was funny because we went to the penalty box. And I probably fought him 3 or 4 times that year, and we all went on against the finals with him in the Stanley Cup Finals, and we had a couple battles here in Buffalo. So it was an interesting first exhibition game.
He fought Tim Hunter behind the benches. Underneath the benches, there was an exhibition game, and you guys met each other, got kicked out. You both ran down, and you were fighting. Sparks were flying off the concrete. Pat Quinn, the coach of Vancouver, came in, grabbed both of you, and with a big bear, like big growl, was like, that's enough, and pulled you guys off each other. You know, both 230 pounds, and Pat Quinn picked you both up. I think that was unbelievable to be a part of that, and you never see that anymore. And guys would be suspended for a year or 2 or whatever.
Right in the buffet line with all the fans were underneath there. The tables went. It was good.
You know,
he was hiding behind one of those big concrete pillars, and as I went walking by, he just reached out and grabbed me. And with things I said to him on the ice, he goes, "Oh, eh?" And we started going at it. Jim Pizzatelli. The trainer come up.
What was I going to say? What was the second part?
I don't know.
Of that.
I have concussions, man. I don't even remember the start
Me
of
too.
the
I
game.
got knocked out. I got knocked out in my last fight. By the way, things didn't end so well.
Me neither. My last fight, I was cutting both eyes and I was bleeding. I was like, okay, this is it.
The physical thing is I hurt my hand bad in the playoffs one year. And it lasted for a good year and a half. And adversely affected my game. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I was supposed to have won that fight. But, you know, I really lost. And so you put it all together. You know, it's an evolution. And, you know, I think if you look back, our teammates knew, you know, and I wasn't the only guy that scrapped. There was Kong, there was Larry Carrier, Lee Foglin, Danny Gare. I think the guys knew, you know, if push came to shove, we'd always be there for one another. Joe the Crow, well, first thing Crow says is, remember, the Crow knows, you know, and he really wanted you to think that he had eyes all over the place, so you couldn't get away with anything. But he was good for myself and Larry Carrier. We were the two young rookie defensemen. And, you know, we, as I said, we don't know very much about the game. And he really took it step by step for us. Even on-ice drills that we would do after to help our skating, help our pivoting. And Crow, he was a dramatic guy, you know, and I liked him. I really liked Joe. I thought he was good for me, for sure. I thought he was good for the team.
A coach. That was it. There was one coach. Now there's 4 or 5. It's a little different, huh, Rep?
Exactly. He was in charge of everything. Offense, defense, the other team. And then as time went on, video started to come into play. But these guys, most of the coaches, were working from memory, seeing other games, seeing a hockey night in Canada. There wasn't cable TV like there is now. So, yeah, there was, you know, like it was just hardcore, get ready for the game, go out and give your all. And that's what the game was about. And, you know, Joe was in his prime in that era. Joe could prepare the guys. Like I said, he was the guy that could needle them and get them. And do you know what this team said about us? And you know what Joe was excellent at that.
How about sitting in the dressing room before a game? He wouldn't even let us go out on the ice for warm-ups. We had to sit down, and he'd send Perreault out all by himself to skate around in warm-ups. The other team had 20 players skating around. We had one guy, he'd bring in the video, right? And he'd make us, he would make us watch. And he'd say, oh, God. What a player. Just look at him skate.
Yeah.
Look at him out there. And the guys would be so mad and so upset at that point.
Yeah, but those are things.
By the way, we won those games, Joe.
I don't believe that, looking back now, that I was ever cut out for coaching. I liked it to a point. I didn't like to tell players they were going to the minors or trade them or whatnot. It was that's part of the toughest things that you ever can do. And it's, you know, after being a player, and I came right out of being a player to being right into coaching. As a player, you could always do something about what was happening. As a coach, you had to hope that your team and the players on the team could do the things you wanted them to do or expected them to do or whatever. So that was frustrating, but and I found it, I always thought I was popular as a player, at least I tried to be, and as a coach, you're alone. You're, you know, it's a different life, a different world, and I enjoyed it though. You know, Buffalo's a small town, you knew everybody, the fans were great, the building was alive every time you went to it, wonderful owners. I mean, there wasn't very much more you could ask for here than the coach here, and the team was very good. So it was very rewarding under those circumstances.
Floyd Smith, who was the coach, handled it perfectly. He made it fun to be at the rink, and that's when I went on to coach for a long time. And one of the things I had decided I wanted to be as good as I could technically, but I was going to make it enjoyable for the players, and I tried to do that everywhere I was.
Another great guy that Buffalo would love because of his, you talk about intense, I mean this guy was intense. I mean you talk about lacing up the skates and something snapping, that's Rick. I mean, and he coached the same way, very intense, you know, and I remember one game he came in between periods. He was never abusive or or in your face to players, but boy, when he snapped, it was like the whole team, and you couldn't understand him because he growls. And it's.
Can you replicate that?
Well, there's a great video. I hope you guys can find it. He's on the bench, and I think he's mad at the referee, and he's got his notes, and he's just, and if you can't hear him, but on the bench, it's actually, it's no words. It's just a big growl.
You know, I think he's a smart enough individual that, you know, he could play that role, but I think when he got into that confines of whether a lacrosse field or a cross rink or hockey rink, that like any of us, you're a different person, and things happen and switches go on and off, and I know I've seen it behind the bench, I've seen it in the dressing room, I've seen it on planes. He ripped the back seat out of a plane one night because he had to sit at the back, and you know, we're flying in the old prop jobbies back then, and it wasn't safe to begin with, and he's ripping seats out of the back, and guys are thinking the plane's falling apart, and no, he's nuts. So
when I played, I had to play that way, or I wouldn't have played. I'd have had no chance of being a professional player. When I coached, I always felt that the coach's personality was in some way or another going to reflect within the team. So I wanted to be an intense guy. At times I did a totally bunch just show, because I wanted people to think I was a little bit out there. You've got a team that's, if you're coaching a physical team, big tough team, the one thing you can do that really will bother your opponent is to make them think that the coach is clinically insane. Then they're really worried.
I've told everybody this. I thought he was great.
And we would get tainted a little bit by the older guys who, Scotty, and they'd have, our French guys had friends in Quebec and stuff. I agree with Lindy. I thought he was a fair coach. It was fun to listen to on the bench, like how far ahead he was, or you know, he'd do some silly things and it'd make you scratch your head, but yeah,
he had lots of, you know, you got behind the bench, he was, you know, some of the line matchings and things he figured out. I thought he was so good with, he was tough on players. You know, I won't, at times tough on me. I know at times he was tough on Larry. But
tell him that one in Detroit.
My favorite though is still Quebec, when I gave the puck away a couple times. I had the puck, and I think you and I were partners, and I tried to stick handle through center, and the guy took the puck from me, went in and scored, and I didn't see another shift the rest of the period. And, you know, we come in Quebec, there's a table in the middle. Scotty comes walking in, and he's walking around the table, and he always had this slap the back of his hand, and he was laughing. And, you know, we're all quiet, and we're going, oh, geez, somebody's going to get it. So he's laughing and slapping his hand, and he's looking up, and he goes, imagine that. Lindy Ruff stick handling. And he says, shoot the puck in. And so it was his way of getting a message to me, and probably a softer, gentler. I mean, I was embarrassed, but it was a kind of a nice way of doing it.
If we had a 10:30 practice, our phone would ring at 9 o'clock, and nobody would be on the other end. If we had 11 o'clock practice, our phone would ring at 9:30. And when Scotty, we never knew who was calling us.
It's probably getting Bro to call us.
But when he left, our calls stopped coming. Our wake-up calls.
Yeah. It was a pretty sad day when that happened, too. I remember the Seymour Knox walking in and saying that, you know, Scotty Bowman was going to be fired. Before that, Scotty went around, I don't know if you remember that morning,
Yeah,
Scotty went around the room and told every guy how they could be a better player. You know, you got to dedicate yourself more, you got to work on your skating. He went around the room and told every guy, you know, how they could be a better player, and then 5 minutes later, they fired him. Which, you know, at the time, that was one of the soft side of Scotty that we really never saw. And, you know, I remember getting a letter from him, and I had it on my fridge for the longest time. You know, him talking about the game and respecting your family and realizing that it is just a game. There's more to life than and to me, I didn't see that in my first few years with Scotty. I just see him pushing us to be better players. And, you know, I still talk to him this day. He's just down the road.
Down here, yeah.
He's down the road. He comes into the building. I think I talk to him more now than I talked to him in the 15 years that I was around him.
You know, of all the teams I played for, that's the one that I really hang my hat on. I was a Buffalo Sabre. You know, I played for Quebec Nordiques, Washington Capitals, but I think everybody picks one team that they really, a lot of maybe emotions, things that happened, and Buffalo was very special to me in the regard that after I got traded there, it wasn't 2, maybe 3 weeks, and I was playing those 2-3 weeks. Darren Pupa was, I believe, was out with a broken arm. It was me and Jacques Cloutier, and I started with that shutout. So I was on a roll, and things were going really good. I was in that zone and playing as best, probably, you know, on a roll, I guess you'd just say. And then the infamous jugular vein incident happened at the Odd.
The whole day was not a good day. He woke up in the morning, I got him up, and you know, he was ready to go, but at the rink in the morning, he was off. We went back for lunch, and our girlfriends and fiancés at the time had showed up the night before on a flight, and he was not talking to anybody at lunch, which is rare. And you know, he admitted he had told his fiancée in the afternoon. He says, "No, I just don't feel good, and I don't have a good feeling about tonight." And it turns out he was right. And it was strange. The girls' first game seeing us in a Buffalo uniform live, and they had to go through that.
You know, it's been 22 years now, and I still remember it pretty graphic. I do remember that skate coming up. I have terrible nightmares for a long time with that, where I'd wake up straight up in bed. I mean, just like in the movies, and the guy sits straight up in bed. That was me, and sweating. And those nightmares for quite a while.
I was on the ice for sure.
I was on the ice too.
You know, it was a scary moment for all of us. I mean, fans included, everybody watching on TV. I mean, everybody thinks that would happen more often, and it never really does. And you know, you know, I was.
It was surreal. It felt like it was going on forever. It probably really only lasted 30 seconds or so, but by the time the scrum kind of went off to the side and we all realized what was going on, I think our trainer was already there.
I was doing the color that night. I was working with Ted Darling. I used to shift between Jeanneret and Darling. But anyways, we're watching. And it's funny, instinctively, being a player, I knew it was bad right away. Right away. You'd just been in that position before. And all I remember doing was I pressed the button so you couldn't hear me at home, but I could talk to the director, and I was telling him over and over, please, for God's sakes, whatever you do, don't show the crease area. Don't show the crease area. This is really bad. Whatever you do, don't show it. And I remember kind of Clint coming out of it, and he almost like grabbed his own throat more or less and just skated off the ice instinctively.
That play was developing. I was on the bench, and I could see that the guy was going to the net hard. And I know for a fact that as a human being, if something sharp is coming to your face, you're going to duck away. But Clint did duck away. If he would have ducked down his head, the skate would have hit his mask and he would have been fine, but he didn't. His neck opened up, cut him, blood started coming out. Myself and Pizza jumped on the ice. We went to him. Clint was holding his throat, and I can word for word, verbatim, what he said. Get me off the ice. I don't want to die in front of 16,000 people.
I've never really been a part of an incident on the ice that was that close to someone dying.
I remember like coming into the pile, and you know, it's like Monty Python. I'm looking him right in the eyes. As I turned to go to the bench to get a towel or something, our trainer was already by.
Jim Pizzatelli, he did a fantastic job. And from there, right on down the line, Rip Simonik, you know, the ownership, the coaches, the players.
We got him in the medical room, and we put him on the table, and the doctors were working on him. He grabbed my hand, he says, Rip, do me two things. Call my mom and call a priest. I said, well, we're not going to need the priest, but we're going to call your mom. So I called his mother. John Gertler was the PR guy at the time. Jerry Meehan was the general manager. So Gertler calls and he goes, the phone's busy. I said, Gertz. I said, Mrs. Malarchuk saw her son just get his throat cut on TV. Of course she's on the phone with somebody. Had the operator cut in, said, "This is Mrs. Malarchuk, this is Rip Simonek, the trainer with the Sabres. Your son's gonna be okay. The doctors are working on him." And she cursed me out. "You this, you that, how could you have the guts to call me in a moment like this?" I said, "Listen, please, don't hang up. I'm gonna give the phone to Jerry Meehan, our general manager, and then he will talk to you."
And then we ended up playing the game, finishing the game.
Well, we finished the period. I think they wanted to get us off the ice, but we ended up finishing that period. And you know, when you talk to people that were in the building that night, it was.
Doesn't it seem like everyone was in the building when they talk about it?
Yeah, they were all there. Well, they were all there on TV, I guess. But you know, the pile of blood that was there, and cleaning it up, we ended up finishing the period. We ended up losing that game. But I remember coming in the room and Grant Ledyard, who they were good friends coming from Winnipeg or coming from Washington together. You know, he's throwing up in the bathroom. We're physically sick of what we saw. It was a pretty scary night.
I didn't have shock. I think I went into shock, but I was up at the hospital, General Hospital, when I was in there, and the media, there was people saying they were relatives trying to sneak in. The hospital was incredible handling but basically I left the hospital early and they snuck me down through the basement because of the people trying to get in to see me, media trying to get in to see me. You know, I went and saw the kids up in the children's ward the next day after my surgery, and there was some video of that, and I broke down there. You know, that's when it really hit me, seeing these kids, and some of them may be facing death. It wasn't, you know, they were sick kids. And I realized how close maybe I could be, you know, either dead or, you know, close to it. And I broke down and cried in one of the press conferences. And that's when the emotion just really flooded me, and, you know, kind of the shock really hit. The one thing that puzzles me even today is that I did come back and I did play that season. I played in the playoffs too. And the next year, coming to training camp, there was still doubt that I was going to be the same goalie. And I thought I had put all that behind me. That training camp, surprisingly, was very, very difficult for me, because I don't know if it was the emotion that was able to carry me through the season, and then things calmed down over the summer. And you go back to training camp, and there was still a lot of doubt. You know, articles saying, you know, will he rebound? Will he rebound? Well, I thought I already did. And that affected me a little bit. And I did have to, I was still fighting things like in practice when a player was cutting in real hard on the net, and that I was still cringing a little shy. But I fought through it. But I remember one time, shortly after the accident, I was still staying in a hotel for that whole season, the rest of that season, and I ordered a pizza. And at that time, they bring it right up to your room, and brings it up, and I go to pay the guy, and he says, "Oh, nope, can't take it, the boss told me." So, you know, I couldn't. It's amazing how the city just rallied around me, and a very horrific, terrible time, but a lot of good things came out of it too for me. You know, I discovered some stuff about me that I was tested probably to the ultimate test of a person, you know, facing death, or the possibility of death, and going back into that war zone as a goalie. And you know, I'm not going to say it was easy. You know, be honest, it wasn't. It may have looked easy, and my interviews may have made it sound like, you get bucked off a horse, no big deal. Get back on, get back. Oh, it was tough. It was tough. It was very emotional.
We had four goaltenders that preceded Hasek. We had Tommy Barrasso, Darren Pupa, Clint, and Grant Fuhr. And for one reason or another, which I don't want to get into, I didn't have a sense that we had a guy who was going to carry us like Roger Crozier had carried the Detroit Wagrins, like Jacques Plante carried the Montreal Canadiens. And those were my standards for goaltending. And so when Clint went through this process, and you know, he was part of the group that was in that list, it became clear to me that, you know, we needed to be a true contender. We needed to do better than average or good goaltending. And Tom Barrasso, granted, he went on to win Stanley Cups in Pittsburgh, which was fine with me. You know, he grew up and matured and became, you know, a champion, and good for him. But that experience led me to saying, okay, we've got to get top-notch, better goaltending. How are we going to get it? You know, in those days, teams didn't trade their number one goalies very often unless it was for a superstar. And I had gone to the World Championships that spring and saw Dominik play in a game against the, I think the Russians, in which he'd stopped something like 70 shots. And, you know, that was the beginning of my sense that maybe there's this guy. And I had inquired in Chicago about whether or not they were having a goaltender controversy between Hasek and Eddie Belfour. Eddie Belfour was Mike Keenan's favorite, and I think Hasek was the guy they were expecting to emerge as the better goalie. But he never got enough games. But all of his statistics were better than Belfour's in the games he played. So when the chance came along during that summer to talk seriously about it, we did.
Hasek came to us from Chicago, and here's a kid kind of flopping around the net, dropping his stick, grabbing pucks with both hands. And we were like, man, is this guy an NHL goalie, or what's going on here? And then he had some chances to play, and then we found out that he's not only athletic in the net, but he's acrobatic at the same time.
He was unbelievable. So good. Remember he's playing chess with ice pieces on the ice?
He was. And you got to say it, he was the best goaltender that we ever played against or with. And he was a guy that, you know, was a student of the game. He studied the game. He put a lot of effort into it.
You know, looking back, everybody knows now that Dom was one of the best that played. He was one of the most creative guys at his position. Some of the moves and some of the way he carried himself were, I think, stuff he just invented on his own. I mean, he was able to go post to post with his butterfly. He was one of the first guys to drop his stick and grab the puck with his hand and throw it somewhere. He was also one that catch it with his glove and then bat it with his stick. He perfected really the rollover Dom save that became, you know, a signature, unbelievable save. So from a sense of goaltending, he scared a lot of people because people never saw some of the saves he made. People never saw a goaltender go into these type of contortions to make saves, which turned out to be the norm maybe a couple of years later, that, you know, this is the way he played the game. I think people studied the way he played it, and like all great players, some players that followed were going to take something from the way this guy played. And I think that's one of the biggest praises of all, is that you can have somebody want to play like you because you've got something that they don't have.
Well, as a defenseman, you know, an offensive defense, especially in my game, I could take chances and would help our forwards and put some points on the board. It gave our team stability. I mean, every night we knew he was going to be there. He was just unbelievable. So when you know you're going to a game every night in the NHL and you know that you're probably only going to give up 1 or 2 goals, hey, listen, you got a shot every night.
Dominik certainly made everybody in front of him better just by allowing us to play without fear of making mistakes. And even coaching kids today, I mean, you try and teach kids to play without without the fear of making mistakes, because you can't progress unless you do.
One person said that, you know, he's one of the best development guys we got, because now all of a sudden that big mistake or that breakaway you gave up on a bad pass, Dom has made the save, and that mistake isn't quite as big because your goaltender hasn't let it in.
You know, I was fortunate to be able to just play the game. You know, even being in a defensive role, I was allowed to just play the game, and we all benefited from that in the lineup.
He competed hard in practice. That was the thing. He just didn't want to be scored on.
You never knew what he was going to do. Hard worker in practice. I mean, incredible. He'd stay. He'd want you to shoot at his head.
Tremendous intensity of practice. A guy that, with the number of games he was playing, which was almost every game of the year, wanted to practice every day. And along with practicing every day was the fact that he didn't want to let any goals in at practice. And if you want to single-handedly, you know, get your offense frustrated, you just let him shoot on Dom all the time, because, you know, he frustrated you. He didn't You know, if you lined up 20 shooters and you went 3 rounds and there were 60 shots and, you know, 2 went in, that was too many for Dom. You know, Dom would say, we must go again, and he was going to do it till nobody scored. And I think that says a lot about what he put in, and along with his off-ice workouts from biking and the fitness end of it there, it just incredible amount of work.
They were, you know, hands-on owners. They to the extent that they wanted to show the players that they were behind us, they were supporting us, and they really cared for the team. You know, it was great to see them behind the bench, and always, you know, I think wanting to be behind the bench because they wanted to show that they were behind the team. And you know, on the emotional side of it, you know, you're pretty proud when you won the game, scored a goal, and they'd be up there applauding your efforts. And I think they love the game too. You can't own a hockey club if you don't love the game, and I think that's why they owned it for such a long time. They were a very giving family, and I was very appreciative for having that kind of ownership, especially during my stay in Buffalo.
There was a time during the year, and I don't know when it was. It was, I think, earlier in the season, but Phil Housley and Jerry Korup and Seymour Knox all had a birthday close to the same time. So inevitably, there would be a game during the year that we would all go over to Seymour's place over in Nottingham after a game, and have his birthday party. But because it was Phil and Jerry's, it would be theirs as well. And you know, you'd eat soup you couldn't recognize and whatever, great food. But it was, that's what they were. They were like, you know, come on over, and it was kind of a real family deal. They
just because there wasn't raw meat on a bone, you didn't like it.
They would. It was
the matter. You couldn't pronounce vichyssoise.
Is that what it was?
Remember, you said, "What's wrong? It's cold."
Look at how far he's come. I'm so proud of him. So yeah, no, then they'd come on the road trips, and yeah, it was probably easier to be an owner like they were back then.
They were at every game. They sat right on the, you know, 5 rows up, right against the wall there behind our bench. The 2 brothers would come in only when we won, and, you know, shake everybody's hand. We had, you know, one of the good things is we did have a party at their house down in South Buffalo, which was awesome. But they invited us out to the golf course in Craigburn
at the end of the year.
At the end of the year, or during training camp, just before training camp started. So, just passionate guys that love the game. I mean, I think the ownership in today's game is not the same. It's you know, it's more about, you know, dollars and cents, and to them they just love.
They love the players. They like the whole atmosphere. Sitting right behind the bench, they had a phone under their seat. If Dave's sock was ripped, the trainer would pick his phone up and he'd have to get a sticker on his helmet fixed. Or Jeannie Knox was great with all of us. I had back surgery, and I think she was the first one to come visit me in the hospital and brought me a care package. We just felt like they were part of it, and I think they knew they had a lot of young kids on the team. I mean, at one time we had 18 of us were young single guys living on the team at some time in our career. Through trades, Jim Korn was there without his wife. Clark Gillies was there without his wife. Tom Curvers. There was a year where there was 18 of us that were single, and I think with us having those 7, 8 kids, first rounders, they realized we were young kids and really tried to help us off the ice as well as give us what we needed on the ice.